Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by BASF.
Kara Oostros here with RealAgriculture.com. We are back here today with another Pulse School episode, and I have here with me Breanne Tidemann, who is a research scientist with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada based in Lacombe, Alberta. How is it going today?
Pretty good. How about you, Kara?
Great. So we're here today to talk about a study you recently published about wild oats and how we can further control them, especially with a lot of the resistance we are facing across the prairies. So what are some of the things you have found?
So this was a study looking at cutting off the wild oats. So because of the resistance that we're seeing with herbicides, and you know, I am the harvest weed seed control girl. Ideally, we'd be able to target them with harvest weed seed control, but those seeds tend to shed before we can harvest. So this was, what else could we potentially do? And it came from the idea that when you drive across the prairies in July and August, you can always see when there's wild oats in a field. They're weed that doesn't hide well. You can see them. And so the idea was, since we can see them, that means they're above the crop. Maybe we can cut those off. And we've talked to producers about this before. It's been of interest, especially for organic producers. And one of the questions that we get is, when are those seeds viable? So if you think about it, if the seed is not viable and you cut it off before that seed could actually produce a new plant, fantastic. You just did seed control on the wild oats. But if the seed is already viable when you cut it off and that seed head falls to the ground, all you did is put more seeds on the ground. Mm-hmm. So that's where it's not going to be a great fit. And when we would get the question on, you know, when are those seeds viable, we didn't really have an answer. So that's one of the things that we wanted to look at in here. So what we did is, when the panicles would come above our crops, and we used lentils and wheat, so a nice short stature crop and a little bit of a taller crop. What we did is we would cut the panicles off from once those panicles were fully extended. So you know what that looks like when it actually comes all the way up and you can see that, oh yeah, there's a wild oat there, kind of thing. And so we started cutting that week, and then we cut on a weekly basis until the seeds started to fall off of the wild oat. And when we would cut those panicles, we did it by hand. It was a very labor-intensive project. Thank you, technicians and students. We would cut those panicles off, and we would take the seeds inside. Half of them we would use to do a weight and a dry and a percent moisture. And then half of them we were measuring some crazy things to see if we could use it to predict viability. So wild oats always have the little on at the end of them. And when those seeds are mature, that on is at 90 degrees. So we wanted to see, could you measure the on angle? So yes, we had protractors. And we were measuring the on angle to see if we could predict when wild oats seeds were becoming viable that way. It's not a great indicator. The on angle changes as viability increases, but the on angle doesn't change very much for like a 95% increase in viability. So we don't recommend going out and buying the protractors. It's not that helpful, and it's kind of hard to do. They're little. But what we did find, and it was a bit of a surprise to me, from the first week that we started clipping in lentils, so that's the earliest that we could see those wild oat panicles for sure. We were able to start clipping about a week earlier in lentils than in wheat. But right from the first clipping time, we had up to 10% viability in our wild oat seeds. And within a couple weeks after that, so I think it would have been by about 5 or 6 weeks after that, we were up to 95% viability of our wild oats. So that viability increases really, really quickly in those seeds, which means that if you're looking at clipping as a management strategy, you have to be out there very soon after those panicles are visible.
So when about in the season was that you were seeing those panicles up?
Mid-July to the end of July.
Okay. Yeah. And how could this be implemented into a large-scale farm? Like, how can producers use this?
Yeah, so producers are not going to go out with the little hand shears that we had, obviously. There's actually commercialized pieces of equipment that could technically do this, especially on a crop like lentils that is shorter. So there's a significant height difference between the wild oats and the crop. But there's things like the comb cut, which comes from Sweden. There's a Borgo weed clipper, I think is what it's called. There's one called the weed surfer, I think it is. There's a few different versions, and like the Borgo version, I want to say is 40 or 50 feet. And it's basically, the idea is it's essentially mower blades. So you would lift the blades up above the crop and take it across and mow those wild oats off. So we do have another study that I'm still working on analyzing and writing one of these days that looks at the actual effect on the wild oat population the next year. So where we actually let them drop and just to see what happened in terms of our weed control by doing this. So we're still working on that part of it. But like I said, we were surprised to see how early you would actually have to cut to not be putting viable seeds onto the ground.
And how do you see a management technique like this? Like, obviously you don't have numbers right now, but looking forward into the future with herbicide resistance and stuff like that, how do you see this being a positive?
It's something else that can be tried. There's a lot more focus in the weed science community right now on managing the weed seed bank. Actually managing the seed bank, making things germinate when you want, or making seeds die that are in the seed bank is next to impossible. It's very, very challenging. There's people that have dedicated their entire careers to that and haven't found anything. So it makes sense then that instead of targeting the weeds that are already in the seed bank, you target what's going to go into them, which is where harvest weed seed control comes in. Like I said, because wild oats aren't a great fit, this is sort of looking at the next step of how else could we target that. So it's really trying to find another spot in the wild oat life cycle that we could try and find a way to manage them.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to add about what you've found, or what producers, I guess, can do to help in the future?
The other thing I guess I'd mention is that there are people that are not buying separate pieces of equipment to do this. There's people that have modified swathers to do this type of practice. And it's not just wild oat that it could be used on either. So we were focusing on wild oats because that's an obvious one, but for lentil growers, resistant wild mustard might be another one where you could cut it off and prevent some seed set there using the same kind of technique.
Okay, awesome. Thank you very much.
No problem.